Finally, I'd like to get to our keynote speaker. We've made him wait way too long, and we're running a little bit behind, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time in introducing him. His bio is in your program. But I've known Jerry Hirsch for about 25 years. When I first met Jerry, he was working on the same things we're talking about today, and we still have a ways to go, but we've started to implement some of his ideas and concepts. The main one is collaboration. How can nonprofits collaborate? How can they work more efficiently, not just in homeless issues, but in all kinds of issues? And his Lodestar Foundation that he founded and is the president of has had that kind of a charge to everyone in nonprofits for many, many years. And not just in the United States, but internationally, Jerry has created those types of collaborations. And then the other thing is to implement best practices in business that nonprofits can use to be more efficient and more collaborative. Jerry is a graduate of Temple University, the ASU Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, and I am very, very proud to call him my friend, Jerry Hirsch.
I really am appreciative of being able to speak to you this morning. I've been a supporter, not a supporter of the homeless. That doesn't sound right. I've been an advocate of trying to eliminate homelessness for many years. And my reason has nothing to do with altruism or giving back. It's really a question of my guilt, because as I've happened to meet homeless people over the many years when I first started getting involved, I believed then and I believe today that absent circumstances, I could be one of those people. And I feel guilty that I'm not. And I'm thankful that I'm not. And so I try my best to do what I can in that regard. But whatever I do, I give some money every year, and many of you do the same. But that's nothing compared to the time and effort that Mike McQuaid has done. And you know, the homeless campus has three major players: the Lodestar Day Resource Center, St. Vincent de Paul, and Cass. Steve Levinsky is here from St. Vincent's, who I've known, who's been there forever. I happened to see in the hall Guy Mickelson, who's been a board member of Cass since 1983. And Mike McQuaid has been with the Lodestar Center forever. And these people are quiet heroes of our community. And so another reason I feel guilty is I'm just giving a few bucks here and they're out in the trenches really doing all the work, and I've done it for years. So if I would just take a moment to just say thank you to them. Mike asked me to spend some time telling you about my path to philanthropy and how I got involved in it. And I'll try to be as quickly as I can, but it does take a little while. And I might mention, first of all, that in light of the big political issue today is immigration, that my parents were immigrants. Not only that, my father started life in this country as a busboy. And I think here in Phoenix you'll see many immigrants are busboys. In any event, my father was a busboy, my mother was a hostess, and eventually they opened up a little business in a wealthy community in Long Island. And I went to school with a lot of other kids who their parents had a whole lot more money than I did. And my goal was to have as much money as they did someday. When I was 20 years old, I had my first business. I'll move on to the time when I was 48. I was 48 years old, thought I had a real happy life. Married, had 6 great kids. had a very successful business at that time, primarily developing shopping centers. Spent some time in the community doing civic activities for my synagogue. Everything was great. One day my wife came and said she's divorcing me. I went from being on top of the world to the bottom of the lowest pit you can imagine. I developed a deep depression, so deep that it became life-threatening, and I wound up being locked in the hospital in Scottsdale Memorial Hospital in downtown Scottsdale. And during the first few days, I couldn't contact my business, just had to sit there. My kids told me, I was concerned about them first, and they told me, Dad, don't worry about it. Most of them were at college at the time. We'll take care of ourselves. You just worry about yourself. So then I started thinking about my business, how successful I'd been. But since I had been so close to death, I also started thinking about my legacy. If I died, how would I be remembered? One thought I had was, well, you know, before I got there, there was around 400 and some odd shopping centers in Arizona. Now there's 600 and some odd. Maybe I'd be known for that. Didn't sound very good. You know, I'd also made quite a bit of money. And our family didn't live that luxuriously, and so it was sort of like a score. And it was like playing Monopoly with the real estate I was doing. And I said, will I be known to be a great Monopoly player? That's the way I'd want to have my legacy? And I said, there's got to be something more meaningful. And so at that point in time, I decided I was going to quit my business and do something else. I didn't know what it was. But during those few days, when I started thinking about my kids, my wife, my business, I kept on writing it down, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And then after a few days, I had an epiphany. Maybe I could be a writer. And that thought really got to me. And I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to be a writer. Well, I didn't know anything about writing. I'd never written anything. So I decided to go back to school. Well, within a few days, my depression had eased, got out of the hospital, enrolled in ASU, in literature courses, creative writing courses, and I was on my way. Well, I couldn't totally eliminate my business, which was, again, commercial real estate. So it wound up in the mornings I went to ASU, in the afternoons I was in real estate. And it was amazing, the juxtaposition about studying Shakespeare in the morning and doing a Walmart lease in the afternoon. Well, there was a couple of times during that voyage that really changed my life. First one morning, we studied in literature that famous poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, think about love, how many ways I love you. I forgot the exact title. I think you all know the poem. And that day for lunch, I had lunch with one of my former real estate buddies who very excitedly told me he just made $400,000 in a real estate deal. Well, in my prior life, that'd be pretty impressive. But then all I can think of was that poem. And that was a poem that over hundreds of years, thousands of lovers have used to express their love for each other. And I said to myself, what would I rather do? Be that poet who had written that poem to cause all that love, or be the real estate guy that made $400,000? What if it wasn't 400,000? What was it, 4 million or 40 million? Which would I rather be? And really, for the first time in my life, I thought that I could do something maybe that would be far more valuable than making any money. Well, I went on, about 6 months later, studied another poem. This was a poem by a famous English poet, William Wordsworth. It was called The Old Cumberland Beggar. And Wordsworth was a social activist, and during England in the 19th century in London, there was a whole lot of beggars on the street. And so the city council had decided that what they would do is build a safe house to provide for all the beggars. And they could live in the safe house, and they would provide food and shelter for them. But a condition of that was they couldn't beg anymore in the street. And Wordsworth was against this. He wrote this poem to express his feelings that the beggars had a social value in the community. And the poem was based on a story. The story was a situation where there was a lady who lived on a meager pension in a little cottage. And one Saturday, she got a knock on the door, and who was it? It was a beggar asking for alms. And she went to her kitchen and went around and found some scraps and gave it to the beggar. And the next Saturday, the beggar came back, asked for more alms, and she did the same thing. And eventually, this woman's whole life was to be able to work during the week to provide something for this beggar. And this gave her a purpose in her life. It gave her life some meaning. And all of a sudden, what I realized was that beggar, he had a purpose. And his purpose was to give that woman a purpose. And that really impressed me. It really began to show me a sort of new way, a new path to go. Well, about 6 months later, a friend of mine gave me a book he had read that said had changed his life. And the name of the book was Man's Search for Meaning by a guy named Viktor Frankl. Now, I've given this talk before, and oftentimes some people in the audience should nod their head because this book is a worldwide famous book. But for those of you who are not familiar with it, Frankl was a very prominent Jewish Austrian psychiatrist during the Second World War, and he was interned in the concentration camps. And when he got there, he saw something that seemed to be quite curious. He saw that there were some old, frail people who wound up enduring life and living longer than some young, strong people. He didn't understand why. And so he investigated. And he found out that there was something that was more important to living than food or clothing or shelter. And that was having a purpose in your life, a deep purpose in your life. And he also found that that purpose was a subjective purpose, not an objective purpose. It was something that that person focused on and really wanted with a passion. And it was that passion that would cause that person to continue to live regardless of other circumstances. He even found one man who had hardly any food, who went around giving the little food he had to people he didn't know who were starving to death. And he recognized that the reason that man did this was to create a purpose for living. This gave him his purpose. And all of a sudden I realized that I could develop that purpose. And by doing something to helping somebody else, it would give me more meaning in my life. It would give me a happier life. And that what became my road to philanthropy. And so what I have done is I pursue helping somebody else, not because of any altruism, because it helps me. Now, a final step on this road happened not the years ago on my road, but more recently. Almost, maybe some people say surreptitiously, other people say there's no such thing as a coincidence. But about a year or so ago, I happened to meet a man named another Victor. This gentleman is a professor at University of Michigan and actually went through the same experience that I did. Probably worse. Well, not probably, it certainly was worse. He had a 19-year-old daughter who died of a certain disease. Well, after that, he spent 6 months in a form of a depression, just like I had. Well, it was 6 months. And somehow or another, he wound up getting out of depression, developing a purpose for his life. And the purpose he established for his life was to tell people, to try to spread the word of the whole idea of having a meaningful life. You can transcend any problems you might have. And he wrote a book called On Purpose. And he goes around the country today lecturing on the importance of purpose. And he went beyond, in fact, what the other Vic did. By the way, this gentleman's name is Victor Stretcher. But he went beyond what Viktor Frankl did. Because of modern times, it's been recognized that not only does focusing on a purpose give you more meaning in your life and have a happier life, but it also has a relationship to your physical well-being. He concluded in his investigation there are really two kinds of purposes you can focus on. One he calls self-supporting values. I'm sorry, self-enhancing values. Self-enhancing values are wealth and prosperity and prestige and how you look, things of that kind. Then there are other types of values called internal values: empathy, compassion, helping others, openness, caring. And those who focus on that purpose, these intrinsic values, wind up having a whole lot of extra benefits as a result. There are four results, including it helps them with their life-changing habits, it helps them with their well-being, they have better sleep, they live longer, they even have better sex. They avoid illness. And so the combination of you might call it selfishness in being helpful, is really compounded in these directions. I have an associate of mine. I don't know if you've ever seen there was a TV series called The Philanthropist, and the series is based on the life of a fellow named Bobby Sager, who's an acquaintance of mine, incredible philanthropist. He's still going around the world helping others. And as I do, he goes around talking about his experience and he ends his comments by saying, be selfish, go out and help someone. And I do it similarly, and I say, if you want to really do some good, if you think your motive is altruism, I just don't believe in pure altruism. And if you think your motive is giving back, I think you're only doing it halfway. You're not really accomplishing it. But if you recognize that you're trying to help others for your own well-being, for your own ultimate happiness, you'll do a whole lot better. And you'll be a much better giver, a much better donor, a much better volunteer than for every other motivation. And that's my story, and I want to thank you so much. Excuse me, I want to say one other thing. One of the things that I do is I give away books. And I happen to have some extra copies of Victor Stretcher's book, of Viktor Frankl's book, if any of you would like a copy. or the modern version of it, which is Victor Stretcher's book, On Purpose. They're a little different, the same thing. If you've ever watched some of the PBS fundraising drives, if you give a certain amount of money, you get a video. Well, if you give a certain amount of money, you figure it out, give more than what you thought you were going to give, please come over and I'll be happy to give you a book. If I run out, you'll have some more. Thank you.